Okay, everybody, welcome to our fourth KSS webinar leading up to our Knowledge Sciences Symposium. As always, we have Denise Bedford here who's going to lead the discussion, so I will pass it off to her.
Okay. And Jake, I'm just going to ask you to check your audio because I think you're coming through very low as well. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We seem to have a core group that's helping us to prepare for the Knowledge Sciences Symposium. And again, I'm very grateful to all of you for coming and sharing your ideas each week. Things are really shaping up very nicely. For those of you who may be coming this week for the first time, I'm just going to do a quick recap of sessions 1, 2, and 3, of discussions 1, 2, and 3. Today, our focus, though, is to talk about what are the intellectual property and intellectual capital considerations for the center. Okay? And this will be a very interesting discussion at the symposium. Okay, so recap from 1, 2, and actually that should be 3. So one of the main takeaways from the first session, and I'm glad we have Richard on the line today because this came very much from Richard's comments, was the fact that our stakeholders that the center would support are multidimensional, and that we needed to understand them, not just in terms of the 5 groups that I had laid out originally, in terms of the academia, business, industry, civil society, labor force, and technology, but perhaps along other characteristics, goals, and environments. So I think we've agreed at this point that the first thing we would ask our working groups, maybe the first 2 hours of day 2, would be to focus on the development of some persona descriptions for the stakeholders that they represent. We've got a very good subscription or a registration for the 2 events so far, so I'm pretty confident that we'll come out of this with fairly good persona descriptions. So the one issue that we thought we would need to complete before then, though, is to identify what are the characteristics that we want the working groups to define. In other words, what is it important for us to understand about the communities we might be supporting? Some of the characteristics we had suggested were, what are their goals? What is it that they do? What's the technology environment that they are working in? What is their social media behavior? Are there any personal characteristics that we would need to take into consideration? And last week, I think Bo made some really good suggestions on perspective. So I think that would be a really another important one to include in the persona profile that we give to the working groups. On the topic of activities, there was support for several of the activities that we had identified in the invitation, in the 5 pillars. And it was clear that this was a very broad set of activities, though. And Richard made another good suggestion that we take the activities that had been identified in the pillars and turn them into essentially verb, noun, short descriptions, labels and short descriptions. It seemed that one of the most important functions that the center would want to support on day 1 would be that of networking, linking, and leveraging. I think it was Mary who made the comment that it's very important that the center leverage what's already out there and serve as a hub for connecting people rather than reinventing the wheel and then trying to push the wheel out. So, and Doug Widener also reminds us that we always need to have in our repertoire or in our, I guess we might say our barn here, bulls and squirrels. The bulls that are the large efforts, and then the squirrels, many of the smaller projects. So we are preparing a set of activity summaries along the lines that Richard suggested, and we'll have that ready for the working groups on day 2. As a starting point, we're converting the activities that were presented in the 5-pillar view to the format that Richard suggested. This does not mean that we can't add things to that list. So if you have ideas for other kinds of activities, please do post them on either the LinkedIn group, or we've created a wiki, and we're going to invite all of you to participate in the wiki so you can actively edit items. So the summaries, we think, will help us to plan for engagements. And they're also going to help us to understand the more specific activities the stakeholder groups would like us to support. So we're going to give that to the working groups on day 2, and then we're going to ask them to build out a prioritized list for us to work with. I would expect that each of the groups would come back with a different set of activities, which both in Ohio and in Washington, so then we would try to merge those into a single view. So given a list of activities from the working groups, we should be able to determine the kind of engagement models that we need. And another thing that I liked that Bo suggested last week was we might be able to, well, I think the general conversation was that we're going to have different kinds of activities, but the extension agents will be very important. But they won't be the whole nature. They won't support all of the activities. There needs not only to be a connection between the center and its agents and the communities, the surrounding communities, but also between the center and the research, the science aspect. So I looked at Bo's characterization of our field as being, having knowledge sciences, knowledge engineering, and knowledge management as a way to think about the kinds of engagements we might have and the types of, I won't say staff, but the kinds of affiliations we need to have at the center. So we need to have some folks focused on understanding the research, communicating the research, and then taking problems back to the research community, something like what Peter Heisig is doing now in terms of putting together a whole research agenda for the field of knowledge sciences. We also need to have some support for those who are focused on the development of solutions and problems that come from the community or from the research side. So this, and if Bo is on the line and I've got this wrong, please correct me, Bo, but sort of in the knowledge engineering environment. And then also those that address the practical applications coming from the field. So I would see our knowledge extension agents building relationships across these communities, but primarily going out to the field. So this categorization actually leads logically to how we support the center. We need to have some knowledge scientists, some knowledge engineers, and knowledge extension agents. And I think a major takeaway from me last week was Bo's comment of having grown up in Iowa and seeing how the agricultural extension service actually got staffed in some cases. Not all of those models worked well. So we need to make sure that that the extension agents that we're pulling in have a good grasp of CAM and are dedicated, I think, to the goal. So this brought us to the need to offer working groups some kind of profiles of these types of roles. So while we're talking about the community roles, the stakeholder roles, we also need to have an idea of what it is the center affiliates would do. Okay. And I think I should stop there because I think that idea came to me after we finished our discussion last week. So may I please open this up for discussion? Does it sound like we've got some we're starting to have some structure for day 2 of the working groups, and that it will, what I'm hoping is that we're coming up with a structure that's going to make it much easier for the working groups to know what it is they're doing and to pull together the work of each of those groups into an actual plan for the center. Comments? Disagreements? Different ideas?
Yeah, this is Martin Hudson from Goodyear. Yeah, that makes sense. The working groups, I think, is a good approach. You have the skills, the knowledge grouped together, categorized, so people that are looking for certain knowledge can reach out to a particular working group.
Okay. Good. And I'll tell you too, so far the registrations are pretty well dispersed across the 5 groups. So we're a little bit lean on the civil society, especially the folks who represent the charitable or the social safety nets. So I have started to reach out directly to organizations both in the Ohio and the Washington area. If you all know of people in these communities, please feel free to send the invitations. We have good subscription from business, from academia, and from the technology, as originally conceived. Okay, but we're a little short on the civil society. Yes, go ahead, Edwin.
Just one thing I want to recap is that an item that I had brought up 2 weeks ago is that how much focus are we going to put on the internal operation? How do we build the wheel before we start running?
Right, and that's what we have scheduled to talk about next week. But there isn't any constraint on waiting for another week. We can talk about that right now if you want to. We have time.
No, that's fine. Let's stick with your original plan. I missed last week, so I wanted to make sure that carried over.
And Richard, I think it might have been your comment that actually prompted me to think about developing the persona for the internal of the center people. We've been talking about the extension agents, but
one more thing, Denise.
Go ahead, please.
In the identifying the roles of the extension agents or the folks working in the center, as we spoke about the 5 lines of operation 2 weeks ago, is there any identification yet on public relations, marketing, anything to that effect yet?
No, that's a good point. I would assume, I think I have been assuming that it would be the extension agents that will be doing a lot of that. But I may be presuming something that is not warranted.
I think your extension agents would be the best ones that deliver it at that regional or local level. But I think as an organization, you have to have something on high that represents the organization.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think that some of the activities we had planned, such as, one thing I would like to do is, once the center is operational, all of the things that we have been doing at Kent State, I'd like to bring under the umbrella of the center. So the KM at KSU webinars, let's bring that in under the center. So I think in a way that's a logical PR channel. But there need to be regular activities that the center provides to people as well. We could probably look at PR, and we had PR and outreach as a 5th pillar, but maybe that should be sort of a horizontal layer that goes across all of the other 4.
That makes sense.
Have any of you had a chance to think more about the kinds of activities? Specific activities that would benefit your stakeholders?
Was the total list of activities come up with, was that last week?
That was 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was just the graphic that displayed the 5 pillars, and then we had Richard's suggestion to build those out into short but more extensive descriptions. Now, my plan is this week to turn those things around. So you will start to see some of those things show up on the wiki. If anybody is interested in collaborating on those, that would be great. But there is obviously no obligation. That's our job here to turn those around. So those should start showing up if you, and you can obviously comment or critique those. We're aiming to have all of the confirmations of registration out this week, and the panels defined, and the working group leaders defined, and then the packet of materials should go up on the website and for everyone to see, but also the working copies will be on the wiki.
This is Martin. You asked about activities with stakeholders. I think awareness, education, maybe risk assessment, if we're not performing that, would be all things that the stakeholders would want to know.
And Martin, I think you're echoing something that that was highlighted earlier, which is that the education pillar is very important, and I think we probably need to be clear on the focus of that. It's not necessarily education just in terms of courses, but as you're saying, training and awareness. It could be just connecting organizations that are doing a good job on risk assessment to one another. Mm-hmm. I think that the center being a hub or a connection isn't going to know the best practices all the time, but we may be able to help you find them.
Yes, the assessment may be how to do an assessment.
Denise.
Go ahead, Edward.
Do you see any competition or overlap between what the IAKM program will be offering and the graduate certificate training with what the center will be representing? Or how would that be steered to make sure it's complementary and integrated?
I would say the center is offering non-credit training, sort of open, which is what we want to talk about today as well. You know, open source, open access. The formal training that requires any credits or accreditation, et cetera, would have to go through the university, which is what I think that's something we want to build into the conceptual model, which is why you might have centers associated with universities around the country.
So do you see it as a open courseware like MIT's open courseware where everything is just laid out and you can take your own class, it just doesn't count for credit?
That's what I would love to see, yes. Open source, especially for emerging topics. You know, emerging topics, hot topics, unsettled topics are not necessarily something a university is going to take on. So I think that would be a perfect product to offer. You know, experiment with some. I'm not sure we would have OOCS, maybe we have sort of medium size. They may not be massive yet, but medium size. Yeah.
I would also suggest maybe setting up a TED channel for KM for the center to represent on an annual or semi-annual basis to do a TED-like production.
Evan, thank you for mentioning that. That came up, I think, last week as well, and I forgot to put it in the notes. The TED Talks on KM-related things would be a great idea. Yeah. We are starting to attract some very big names into the KSU webinar series. So I think maybe moving some of these into a TED Talk would be great. Just as a preview, I think in September, about mid-September, Van Alstyne, the author of the papers on internal knowledge markets, is going to give a webinar. All right. Well, I will close this part of the discussion for now, but ask you to contribute any ideas you have on the listserv. And let's move on to the whole issue of intellectual property and intellectual capital. This is going to be one of our most challenging aspects of designing the center. There are many different competing goals when it comes to this. Some of you know that I was at the World Bank for about 15 years. So my favorite economist is Joseph Stiglitz. And I wanted to provide a little context on intellectual property and knowledge management. Stiglitz says without intellectual property protection, incentives to engage in certain types of creative endeavors would be weakened, but there are high costs associated with intellectual property. Ideas are the most important input into research, and if intellectual property slows down the ability to use others' ideas, then scientific and technological progress will suffer. And my vision for the center is that it is a hub for ideas. It's a hub, it's a place to bring problems. It's a place where people can suggest ideas to solve problems that we consider a broad range, etc. So really our goal at the Knowledge Sciences Center is to mobilize and promote ideas. Now that doesn't necessarily align with our current intellectual property models. Okay? So which kinds of models should we work with? And how do we choose the ones, I shouldn't say which one to work with. It's how do we choose the one that suits the problem at hand? Okay? So for the center to work, I think we need to support the interests of our stakeholders. And sometimes that's going to be a very closed working environment. So we have two large Fortune 100 or Fortune 500 companies working on a solution. The terms of their engagement are probably going to be copyright protection, and that might need to be negotiated between those two organizations. So in other cases, though, we might have public sector folks coming in asking for space or support to solve an open source problem. So we need a different kind of intellectual property model to support that, and that might be entirely open source. But what kind of models do we need to have in place when the center launches? We can't wait a year to figure out what we need. We need to have at least, I think, a set of models that anticipates the kind of engagements we will have. So, what would you all suggest? Do we identify the existing copyright and patent models and work with the legal folks at the university to see what options are available and make those available to as part of an engagement definition or description, almost like project planning. Do we default to one? What kind of issues do you see emerging?
Edwin speaking.
Go ahead, Edwin.
There's two different things I'm thinking of. If you think back, if you're going with the agricultural extension office model, those folks operated with a co-op mentality at the local level. There was a gain in economy of force or economy of scale by having a co-op mentality that everybody chips in and shares the wealth. In an open source or an open concept knowledge, science, and center, it sounds counterintuitive to have it be copyrighted, close hold, not shared. So there's two different things to think of. Do we go after a co-op mentality that everybody wins, everybody shares, everybody can equalize and gain? Or do you go to a privatized consulting, things are close hold? And I think those are two opposing ends of the spectrum. How to approach it, I'm not sure.
And I would prefer, and I think this goes back to like the second webinar, I would prefer that we not be involved in consulting. There's a healthy consulting community that I think we can promote or support. So perhaps what I'm hearing you say, Edwin, is that when our role is different, if it's in different types of things, depending on the engagement, we might play a different role. Our role might be just to connect those two Fortune 100 companies that want to work on something. But when it comes to actually supporting them, we would step out. And that would not necessarily become something that the center participated in. Our role would be simply to the networking. But the majority of our engagements should be related to those cooperative, open concept engagements where we are producing the broader economic value for the region. Am I understanding that correctly? Does that sound reasonable?
I think it's something that definitely needs to be addressed. I'm still not clear because I know you're going to get into copyright and ownership and all of that with the administration, and how to steer that is going to be a quandary.
Right. And I think if we can consider that how copyrights are assigned and how you demonstrate something that is worthy of copyright, it's an individual contribution, or it's a team contribution, and it's the discovery. I think if we're focused on, if our goal is to provide value for the local or regional economy, I think we might want to consider carefully how we would take on engagement that would result in copyright.
Denise?
Yes.
I posted in the chat the mission statement from the Ontolog Forum or the Ontolog community.
Right.
Just for consideration, because they're basically doing a global effort in kind of a similar circumstance around a specific topic.
Right, right. And the Ontolog is the model that I'm always working with, just from my own approach. And I liked Carla's comment. I think we are talking about some sort of a cooperative.
I would agree, because you don't want to become a competitor to the private sector.
Absolutely not. And I think the role that I see academia playing is bridging a lot of the gaps. You know, right now we seem to have quite a polarization between all the 5 stakeholder groups. And I would not see the role of the center as taking on any one of those 5 roles. You know, we're not the workforce. We have a linkage to academia, but we don't want to take over a role of academia. We definitely don't want to become business. We don't want to infringe upon the consulting community in KM. You know, I think we want to be a hub. I think that's the way. I'm sorry?
Hey. I was just voting here.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Hey, John Colson. So I was wondering, you know, the hub, I think, is definitely a noble idea, and that needs to be the core to this. But is there also an opportunity to be a connector to the private sector? Is that a consideration?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I would definitely say that we have to. I'm throwing out the word hub without defining it.
Yeah.
But, yeah. John, I think it might have been you last week, you and Bo, who contributed so much last week, but the bi-directional communication and flow of ideas, you know.
Yeah.
A link from business to business has a lot of ideas that they don't necessarily want to copyright or patent.
Right.
You know, Goodyear has done some great things with their knowledge management initiative, and you know they can share those with the broader industry. But I remember, must have been back in the 90s, that the companies that got like the Malcolm Baldrige Award found that they took on a huge burden just as a result of having been successful in an area, because they were inundated with requests for guidance or information in the area that they had excelled. So if the linkage between business and the center could be, share your ideas with us, and we'll act as the group that helps to promote your ideas to the larger community.
Mm-hmm.
You still retain all the glory and the recognition, but you don't necessarily have to take on all that burden, which in some cases may end up creating a whole new unit just to deal with the requests.
Yeah, you know, I think that's paramount to really making this thing go, is it's a closed loop with some kind of recognition or, you know, point systems or whatever to gamification, to be able to see if there are private sector groups that do get involved and provide information feedback, or let alone anybody, some just Joe Blow person, that their participation and engagement and collaboration gets recognized one way or another, and then that helps drive their reputation and status across the world.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's got to be one way.
So we have another model. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
This is Dean Tessa Goodyear. Martin and I were talking off mic about this as well. John, we agree. And the good news is that even companies like Goodyear, who are traditionally very conservative, have embraced that kind of approach over the last 10, 15 years. So I think the time is right, and it's necessary, and it can work.
Yeah. I'm going to have to go back and look at some of the cooperative models. So far, we're looking at the extension service, which has a cooperative element, but we didn't go into that too much. We also talked about 2 other models, one being the franchise model. If we can come up with a good conceptual design, then how do we hand it off to others in the area, maybe creating a network? I'm writing. Sorry. Please feel free to continue, Chad. The other thing that John mentioned that I was jotting down was the idea that somehow recognizing and rewarding individuals, communities, or groups companies that contribute to the center. So I don't know if there's some non-monetary way of acknowledging, say, that Goodyear has contributed this many ideas to the center and is then due this much value back. Maybe that's something we can ask Marshall and Alfie about those. I guess what we're saying is the center should have its own internal knowledge market, maybe, even though it's a co-op.
Yeah. Can I? So this is John again. I've got these really stuck thoughts in my head for the past couple of years, and I guess I'm getting ready to sort of unleash them. And maybe you guys have already thought about this, but and I'll probably take you guys full circle. So in today's education in elementary school and high school and so on, students are taught to compete against each other. The ones with the best grades are the ones that float to the top and win, so to speak. And so we're all taught to hoard knowledge, right? But of course, when we get out in the real world and you're working in your organizations, you're driven to really try to share knowledge and work in teams. So, you start talking about franchise models. What happens if you go back into the education system, whether it's elementary, high school, or college? And I think there are programs out there today that are doing some of this. But Mrs. Lander's fifth grade class is having a discussion on whatever in science, and some kid, Larry, whoever, raises his hand and asks a question. It's a novel question, a novel idea that then gets posted from the school out into the Kent State Forum for questions and responses or even ideas. And so people are able to reply and connect, but also, does it help drive innovation? What about those new ideas that come out of the classrooms, whether it's college or high school or elementary school, that then get driven into the forum for collaboration and working? And then perhaps maybe even the private sector or the government says, you know what, that's probably a noble cause. Why don't we pick that up? They pick that up and, go make the next greatest drug or whatever, the next greatest product. And then out of that, recognition needs to feed back into that school and back to those people that recommended that. So closing the loop with the recognition piece.
Right.
If there's enough profit or whatever that's pushed from that, then the winning company should provide some kind of scholarships or whatever money back into the system as well. It's been one of those things that's been haunting me for a couple of years. How do you change sort of the school mindset, the individual mindset, to move more toward collaboration, which is really what we're trying to drive, and then connecting that to government and private sector, and then private sector back into education to drive forever education. Is that totally left park or left field? Or?
Not at all, and I was just checking to make sure that John Lewis is on the list of participants, because I think I'd really like to have him respond to that. I think, when we're talking about education and training, we're also not limiting it to graduate school or undergraduate. We'd like this to go primary school level. Yeah, exactly. John, do you want to comment?
Yeah, this is John Lewis. I think it's a great discussion, and I was just thinking about how the last 10 minutes of topics on the pillars bows of discussion of sort of knowledge science versus engineering versus management, and this discussion as far as of intellectual property, or at least recognition and how they connect. And it does make me think about sort of where each of these people are in the what's in it for me, a piece of why people would be coming to the center. And for the sake of what, if we try to answer that question for them, is going to be different for different people. And I think that, for example, when we think in terms of answering the question of what works or what's the best practice, I think that knowledge management has been all about that. Here's what we do here. Now let me show you how you can do it there. I think that the interesting play for the center is when we get into the other types of questions, a different place of learning where I have a piece, I have an idea, and I don't know how to, I haven't fully answered the question of how do I make this work. And I was reading something, there's plenty of examples of this, but an example recently about the laser copy machine, laser printer, where someone had sort of an idea of how to do that, but it always caught fire. They were missing some information on the type of material that the toner would need to be made of. It came from a completely different area. And I think that when we move towards not just supporting the knowledge management, start moving towards knowledge engineering, knowledge science, and how people are thinking of things and how we can connect them. Someone mentioned, sort of the government's role. I don't think that the government or anyone has really done well at addressing the piece of connecting people at that level of answering the question. So if I have this piece, I know it's towards something, and I know the other piece is probably going to come from a completely different area. And how do we connect people at the innovation stage is an area that I think the center could actually just own, because I don't think it's really owned anywhere else.
Yeah. One of the images I have in my mind, and I don't know quite how to do it in the center yet, hopefully there will be some ideas coming out of the symposium, are those dinner conversations that the folks used to have from General Motors Institute. The old iron pack disk drive came out of those conversations, or the freeze-dried coffee came out of those conversations. It was connecting academia and business, just idea people. Yeah, if we could have some sort of a space in the center, whether it's virtual or physical, just dinner conversations. I think that might. These are all challenges, though, for I think designing the electronic environment.
Please, can I make one comment?
Yes, please.
I think that the hurdle to overcome here is if we're setting up something that is totally new thought and a new creation to get away from the competitive model and become a heuristic model in which there is no competition. And I think that's the hardest hurdle, just in your description of the school system.
Right.
It's not the way it is now. Most school systems are not that way. I had action to see an 8-year-old's school system internally, and it's totally different than it was 40 years ago. Totally different. Right. It actually is engaging, and it doesn't beat people up. So it's very interesting how the culture has shifted. And then we could just look at a Montessori type of application to where there is no competition. I think if we can look at this on the highest level, I think it'll unfold. But I don't think we need to compare it to 50-year-ago industry model of economy. But I think we can go beyond that and be far-reaching.
Right. Hello, this is Carla. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, very good. This is really an interesting conversation that we're having today. I've just finished my dissertation, and the topic happens to be on developing bridging enterprises and open communities of practice. So I'm very, very sensitive to the conversations that we're having, and it's extremely important. This is a new paradigm that actually a lot of organizations are starting to use, where they're using open communities of practice, not internal closed communities, as their means of innovation development. So it's so apropos.
Yeah, it's such a fine line, you know. It's like all of a sudden you get some marketing genius that sees dollar signs, and you know, next thing you know, the door closes shut. Right? How do you keep it open?
Yeah. Well, the companies that I studied were what I consider bridging organizations, very similar to what you're trying to do on a not-for-profit level. They did it on a for-profit level. And these organizations primarily did their product development through the use of external communities. Their product development did not originate from within their organizations. So it was quite an interesting, undertaking to look at these types and what kind of personas did they have themselves. And so I go into a great deal of discussion on the behavioral personas of the types of organizations that are looking at this as a successful model.
Carla, that would be really important. You know, that's real life experience, practical experience. If you could share that at the symposium, that would be wonderful.
I'd love to do that. That would be great.
Yes.
Yes, I'll send you a copy. Should I send the whole dissertation, or would you just like a synopsis?
Let's see. Now, let us first ask: has UMI copyrighted your dissertation or are you able to share it openly?
Oh, my dissertation will be on ProQuest. So within probably the next 3 or 4 weeks, it'll be accessible to anyone who has access to ProQuest. So any university will have that.
Okay.
I'm quite open with my content. I don't want to I don't want to preclude anyone from reading, the content. I have a presentation I can provide you guys.
The presentation would be great. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, could you post it on the LinkedIn?
Yes, I can. Yes, I'll do that.
That'd be awesome.
I'm presenting at an innovation conference in September, so that'll be really the first time that I, bring my research forward, and I think that this community, can benefit from it too.
I've actually almost got the wiki all the way up and running, and once I post the link here, you can actually post it there, and everyone can download it from the wiki.
Okay, I'll what I'll do is the brief presentation, which is copywritten. It will be part of the proceedings from the European Innovation Conference. I also have a poster. I'm going to be participating in their poster session as well. So I'll post both of those, so that I think that'll be a quick way to look at some of the concepts that I covered. It's a pretty big study. It's not from the standpoint of I didn't do interview. I'm sorry. I did a qualitative study, which I felt was very appropriate given the size of this new emerging phenomenon where people are using external communities. So I think you guys are really on the right track. This is really great.
Well, Carla, this is just an idea now, so we really are going to leverage your knowledge and experience in working through this to help us design. Is there any chance that you could bring some of the companies that you worked with into the symposium discussion?
I'll check with Corky. They're really my primary organization that, I did the phenomenological, it was a case study. And I can ask Chaotix. They are actually a market research organization that works with conventional companies to get market research, and that's a really interesting organization. So I can ask them, certainly.
That would be great, because it seems to me that gives us a real-life example of how you do product development in the open space, but I'm assuming that the products they're developing are still patented internally or at a later stage.
Some are and some aren't. I know that Quirky just signed a deal with General Electric, and GE is giving them access to all of their patented, there's like a whole set of patented items for the community to work on. That's why this is so relevant, that what you're talking about. And they're hoping, GE is actually hoping, you know, that something will come of it.
That would be great. Yeah. That sounds like a new model to definitely consider.
Yeah, I think so.
Maybe, Carla, maybe you and I can have some conversations offline.
Certainly.
In preparing some of the materials for the symposium.
Yes. And as far as for you know, what we were looking at is, you know, how do we, you know, what do we do about, you know, the intellectual capital besides that? But, you know, there's a very, very robust crowdsourcing model out there. And even communities like Kiva, we could look at that model and how they actually fund projects for communities, and they do some really great work. So if you're not familiar with Kiva, that's definitely something to take a look at.
Excellent. That would definitely be another model. Yeah. Can you send us the link to that, if there's a web link, just so everybody who's not familiar with it yet can look at it?
Kiva?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
That fits very much with the cooperative approach that I think you and Edwin were mentioning earlier. You know, I was thinking while I was driving to Ohio yesterday that right now we have 4 generations of the most highly educated people in history. And it's actually quite silly for us to not be leveraging all that brain power in so many different areas. I look at, you know, how we used social media and crowdsourcing to essentially identify and capture the Boston bombers. I look at citizen science that supports NASA and some of the other scientific organizations. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense for us not to be leveraging all those ideas that are out there. The question is how to design a center that could do this effectively. So you all have got to get a lot of sleep before coming to the symposium, because I really need you to I need your critical thinking skills and design skills in play those days. You know, here's just a simple example. 2 or 3 of us at the university never could have come up with a design that's going to be as good as what we come out with in September. And the webinars have produced ideas way beyond my wildest expectations. So I think this might work. I guess we could say we're eating our own dog food, right? We're not just having 1 or 2 people plan and design this and then asking everybody to adopt. We're actually using some knowledge mobilization to get there. Any other thoughts? How do we present this challenge to the working group? I think we've got a good strategy for doing the persona, the stakeholder profiles, for the activities, for the engagement models. How do we present this copyright and intellectual property and patenting thing? Do we start out with a set of principles, maybe saying that this is, you know, we want to be cooperative, we want to be open source, our goal is more.
I think that's it, Denise. You have to absolutely be able to establish the process and business flow of what the operation's even going to do before we can even approach copyright or anything like that.
Okay, so maybe we get the working group a set of principles and say, you know, make some suggestions based on the principles.
I think one of the key elements that could come out of the work group would be to define the business processes of the Science Center to basically establish, based on the customer base, the stakeholders, and our intent, and build from there. I think copyright and legalities and all that sort of thing may not be achievable, because I can see where this dialogue could carry on most of the day.
Right, right. Okay, so one thing I can do is I can go back to those 5 pillars, which we, in the business architecture context, we look at those as, we characterize that as sort of a business on a page. That could be the Knowledge Sciences Center on a page when we have those defined. And you then take each one of those and you build it out into what's called a business capability. And you look at the flows, the people, the applications, et cetera, that need to support that kind of a capability. So we could also take that along that direction. Okay. So I know that there are a lot of you have had a lot of other ideas who have been very quiet today. Any other thoughts? Marianne, what have I overlooked?
I don't have anything that pops into mind right now. I guess I just want to agree with the comment about the legalisms, the copyright, all that business. I think we might ultimately decide we're kind of going down a rabbit hole there. I think it's the nature of this kind of consortium that there's a free flow of and sharing of knowledge, and I think if we start trying to box that in with this is proprietary, this isn't, this can be shared outside of our group, this can't, that it's going to put up barriers that we don't want to have there.
Yeah, and I think the danger for the center support team is that they get bogged down in administrative stuff rather than the mobilization of ideas.
Hey, Denise, this is John Lewis. Just wanted to connect a conversation I had last week when I talked to people about Knowledge Sciences and Knowledge Sciences Center, and your earlier point about getting enough people, maybe particularly within maybe policy. I wondered what your tagline is around to the layperson around what Knowledge Science Center is, because to someone that I ran this by, when they hear knowledge sciences, it almost sounded like neuroscience. It just sounded like something that most people would not be interested in, and was trying to get them to understand that it's actually something that everyone would get something out of. So I'm wondering, when you're out there talking to people, and when you're setting this conference up to get more people to attend, like what is the secondary tagline that you use that crosses that bridge?
And I think that's a point that I was focusing on this week as well, which is what led me to the task of developing the profiles for knowledge scientist, knowledge engineer, the knowledge extension agent. I think that when we talk to the community, we don't necessarily use those terms at all. We use those for maybe internally organizing what we do, for defining who needs to be involved in engagement. But when we talk to the community, we need to talk in terms of what it is these people do. Because otherwise, the term knowledge sciences sounds, as you say, extremely academic. And I like your suggestion that it's close to neurosciences. But this is intended to be extremely practical and to produce results for everyday people in the everyday world. So I think there's a bit of a translation to be done. And I I suspect that's the idea behind your question.
Yeah, that's it. And I know that I started coming up with my own sort of connections, and I know you have some. I guess I'm suggesting that maybe as a group that we work out that secondary line and make sure that we are in agreement on that and using it in our communications around this.
Yep, which I think also goes back to Edwin, who suggested that, what's the PR model here? Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
That's going to be really important, very important. Perhaps assuming the center goes forward and is successful, maybe we end up renaming it, the Community Engagement or Community Innovation Center. And the whole idea of the knowledge sciences aspect of it is just so much a part of how it works that we don't have to tell people that.
Yeah, I think that I'm not suggesting that it's that the name is wrong. I think that it does capture, and there's a message being said around knowledge science. It's the next tagline, secondary piece, or the description on the website per se in the search, not just the first title tag if you're HTML tag. So it's that secondary, what we mean by this, that I think that if we were all consistent with that, we'll work out.
Okay. All right. One thing we're going to do this week is, as we're putting together all the working materials for the working groups, we're going to revise the agenda. So once those are on the wiki, please have a look at them. And if we've overlooked any items that we think the working groups need to address, is that what you've just suggested, John? Please make sure it gets in there.
Got it.
Excellent. Thank you all again. This is another 2 pages of notes today. Another whole level of improvement of the design. Many more ideas. So, any other thoughts that you want to share during the session today? If something comes to mind on Thursday at 1 a.m., please be sure to put it on the LinkedIn discussion.
When do we break ground?
When do we break ground? Well, here's the pathway forward. Okay, so after the second symposium in Washington, D.C., we take all the feedback, all the input, and update the proposal to the university to establish the Knowledge Sciences Center. We will have to have not only the proposals, but the project plan, sort of a strategic vision for like the next 3 years. So my sense is that breaking ground will be breaking virtual ground first. Although I have to say that the university has already given us a space here on the Kent campus, and it is roughed in, it has walls, it has a door. So as soon as the university approves this, then there will be a sign on the door that says Knowledge Sciences Center.
Congratulations.
Thank you, but right now if you come in, you're sitting on the floor. So breaking physical ground will mean I have to be out there on the pavement trying to generate interest in helping us to furnish and link up the center, etc. So,
one more thing.
Yes.
Is there going to be audio-visual support at both symposiums?
Yes, yes.
So we'll be recording video so we can actually produce something? I
believe so. We are talking about the video recording. We will at least have audio recording. But the video, I don't know that the video will be simultaneous. The video may be posted later, as we did for the Knowledge Management Education Forum.
I was thinking a little something more dynamic. Are we going to have a man on the street kind of opportunity?
I hope so. We will have some students there, yes, who will be walking around capturing ideas.
Then I would suggest the next webinar, deduce amongst the participants 5 good questions for those man on the street interviews.
Okay. Okay. Next week, what we're talking about is the present, just what you've asked, Edwin. What does the physical presence look like, and what does the virtual presence look like? I have a feeling that the virtual presence is going to be a little bit more complex, but infinitely more important to design. So think about that. Come with some ideas. No ideas are too wild. No ideas are too crazy. I think we're coming up with something new here, and I hope it will add some value. Well, since I know you're all giving your time from your lunch hour, how about if we close a little bit early today? Is that okay?
That's fine.
That's good.
Thank you, everybody.
Any suggestions on hotels for the Canton area?
Yes. Contact Jana. She's got some links to hotels. I would suggest the Hampton Inn in Canton, but Jana has a list. Actually, there's a list from the University Center link. They list all the local hotels. They all have shuttles. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Effort.